Now live.
So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's meeting of Newcastle Borough Council's Planning Committee. I propose to take the agenda as printed, and I'll start obviously with item 1, which is apologies, and I've had an apology this evening from Councillor Moffat. I don't know if anyone else has received further apologies. That's the only one I've received. If that's the case, let us progress to item 2 on our agenda, which is declarations of interest. Could I ask if there are any such declarations this evening?
Chair.
Councillor.
Chair, as a point of order, is Councillor Gary White joining us as a capacity on the planning committee tonight, or is he here as an observer? He's
here as an observer and to speak on items 8 and 11, Councillor Woodcock.
Thank you.
I take it that silence means that we have no declarations of interest this evening. So I propose to move to item 3 of our agenda, minutes of previous meetings, which have been circulated. And I'd ask if members are content that they are a correct record of our proceedings.
Move the minutes, Chair.
Could I ask if anyone is opposed to the minutes as printed? In that case, I think we can take silence as assent, so those minutes have been passed. That brings us to our first substantive item this evening, item 4, application for major development, land adjacent to Keele University. And I draw members' attention that there is an additional document in their information pack. And I'll now ask our officer if there's anything further we need to know before we proceed to discuss this item.
To add, Chair, thank you.
In that case, I open the item for discussion. I see no member at the moment who wishes to make a point. I am happy to propose the recommendation from the chair, and I propose to proceed to a vote. So those in favour of this motion, well, obviously if you're in favour, say yes, otherwise say no, and I'll take the vote by roll call. Councillor Reddish.
Yes, permit.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
I think that's everyone. If I haven't called someone's name, please tell me. The names are jumping around on my screen all the time, but I think that's everyone, and I think that is unanimous. In which case, we can progress to our next item, item 5, which is application for minor development, King Street, Cross Heath. I draw members' attention to the fact there are 2 documents which have been appended to this. Again, I'll ask our officer if there is any further information we require at this time.
Nothing further to add, Chair, thank you.
In that case, I'm happy to open the item for discussion and debate and look for motions. Councillor Williams, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I I think we've gone as far as we can with this, and I want to thank the planning officer for his diligence and writing the report, because the history of this, the shoe owning this development in behind number 22 King Street, we lost it on appeal, and it came back to us, and we've been through all the motions, and the officers worked with the applicant and with the residents. And I'll go with the recommendation, Mr. Chair. Just make the point, it's made 22 into an end terrace instead of a reasonably attractive semi-detached with a drive. And we've gone backwards, in my estimation, Mr. Chairman, in allowing this. But I say we have no choice, because we lost it on appeal, and all of the recommendations are set out as the planning inspector made. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other member wish to speak to this item? In that case, again, I propose to proceed to a vote. So I'll ask our members whether they're in favour of the recommendation as printed. Councillor Reddish.
In favour as printed.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
No, Chair, I'm against this application.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield. I've lost you, Councillor. Are you there?
Yes, Chair. So permit.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burgess.
Sorry, permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
And again, I think that's everyone. And that is passed by a large majority. That brings us to item 6 on our agenda. Again, application for minor development, Hope Cottage, Leaset Lane. I believe we have a ward councillor who wishes to speak on this, Councillor Ian Wilkes. Is he with us? I'll just ask our clerk, Mr. Durham.
Just bringing him in, Chair.
Okay. So I think Councillor Wilkes is now with us. Before I ask him to speak, again, I'll just ask our officer whether he and us have any further information we need to know before we proceed with this item.
No, there's no further information to report. Thank you.
Thank you. So just in case people are not watching and not familiar with the speaking protocol, Councillor Wilkes now has 5 minutes to address the committee this evening. That is the sum total of his contribution to our debate this evening. When 4 of the 5 minutes have elapsed, he will be given a verbal warning by our clerk to make sure that he doesn't miss any points that he feels are absolutely crucial. So on those terms, I now invite Councillor Wilkes to address the meeting. Councillor. I think you are muted, Councillor. Again, I have to advise you, Councillor, that you are muted, so no one can hear you at the moment. You'll need to unmute yourself. And I fear I look to other members of the committee, but I'm here. I'm here we are. Excellent.
I'm not a computer whiz kid, and you shrank extremely small, right?
No, begin your 5 minutes whenever you're ready, Councillor.
Right. I bought this. Well, both me and Councillor Proctor bought this to the committee because we feel that it isn't actually, even though officially Greenbelt, actually Greenbelt land. It's in the middle of a fairly sized development that's gone around it, and it literally is just an infill. The nature of the property, there's no large trees, there's no access for animals to get in or out, other than using the road themselves. The site, like I say, has been heavily built upon, mainly because of priorly that it was right next to a scrapyard, so it's got buildings all around it. You're not actually losing anything by having a house built there. In fact, you're actually gaining with our 5-year housing strategy to actually get something to build on there. There's building work going across the road from it, building work going at the side of it. It's not an oasis of Greenbelt, and the officer recommendation for refusing was also that there's no public transport. There's public transport less than 100 yards away. There's a bus that runs through Audley, All Sages Bank, Scott A, and turns at Lysick Lane. It's literally 100 yards away from the house. So there is public transport there as well. The only thing that's going to stay, which is what I would recommend to stay as well, is the actual hedgerow. We all know hedgerows come in very important to the highways for anything going in and out, and that's actually staying. So the important thing is there for any wildlife is still going to be there. If it is that members do want to follow the recommendations of the officer, I would really prefer that you have a site visit beforehand. I think I've covered everything I need to cover. I can't think of anything else. Hopefully, any questions?
You can't field questions, Councillor.
Right.
I'm afraid. The way this works is you're allowed to speak to the committee, but that is the end of your contribution.
Right, but yeah, it literally, if you saw it, you would literally just call it an infill. It's like I say, there's no trees, there's no wild flowers. It's just somebody's backyard that's, well, garden that gets cut. So there's actually nothing there that will lose anything for the green belt. And I'd be the first one to argue anything to keeping the green belt, and so would Bert. But yeah, this is literally, you've got houses at the back from the scrapyard, again at the side. If anything got in there, it's got to use the road to get in and out. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what it's like.
Okay, so thank you very much, Councillor. What I will do now is I will ask our officer if they wish to comment on what they've heard, and then I'll open the item for debate. I see Councillor Holland wishes to make a contribution, but first our officer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, there's no doubt that this is a site within the green belt. The fact that it may be surrounded by built buildings doesn't change the fact that it's in the green belt. So consideration has to be given to green belt policy. And the policy does allow, as appropriate development, limited infilling where it falls within a village. So for this to be appropriate development, not only does it have to be infill development, it also has to be within a village. I think I can assist members in considering whether this is within a village and whether this is appropriate development by showing you some aerial photographs which shows the site in the context of the wider area. So if you're happy for me to do so,
please do so, Mr. Moulton. Yes.
Okay. If I can find the right information. Can you see the site plan?
Yeah.
Right, great. Okay, so so this is the location of the plot of land on which the proposed house is to be built. So this is the junction of Scott Hay Road and Crackley Lane. The host property, Hope Cottage, is the semi-detached property there. Hopefully you can see the cursor. So the proposed dwelling sits on land to the rear of that property, broadly in line with the adjoining bungalow. And as has been pointed out, there are existing residential properties to the rear, which were constructed on a former scrapyard site. So that development was deemed to be inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, but very special circumstances were identified to justify the granting of planning permission for such development. I shall show you the aerial photos and some photographs of the street scene. These are all Google images. So this is the cluster of buildings that you saw on that plan. The next one does go in a bit closer. So the site is somewhere in here, but this illustrates that this cluster of development is not in a ribbon of development that joins up with any nearby villages. So this is Scott's Hay Village. So there is gaps between this development and Scott's Hay, and this road takes you along to Silverdale, so you can see the outer parts of Silverdale there, and again you'll see that there is a gap. There's no doubt in my mind that this is not part of a village. The cluster of buildings here doesn't constitute a village. It doesn't have the characteristics of a village, and it doesn't form part of either Scott's Hay or Silverdale. So this brings you in a little closer. So the land in question is here, and you can see the buildings around. So I'll just show you a few photographs, Google images from within the street. So this is the junction that I referred to, Scott Hay Road and Crackley Lane, and that's the other semi-detached property to the application property, Hope Cottage. Oh, all right. So Hope Cottage is the property to the left of the pair there. This is looking in the other direction, so you see the gable end of Hope Cottage. So that's along the side of Hope Cottage. So the property that the proposed dwelling will sit beside is that property there. And the last photograph or image shows the adjoining property, and as I say, the dwelling will sit in to the rear of that property. It is correct to say that there is no technical objections to the siting of a dwelling on that plot. It would be acceptable, and in terms of its design, it wouldn't adversely affect the amenities of adjoining residents, but it is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, and we haven't identified very special circumstances to justify the granting of planning permission. Reference was made to this one dwelling contributing to the housing supply, which no doubt it would, but it is a very small contribution, and the recommendation remains to refuse on the basis that it's inappropriate development. In terms of the second reason for refusal, there may be access to public transport, but there is no safe routes for pedestrians to get to the facilities within the village of Silverdale, and which are the nearest facilities. So anyone who lives in that property will heavily rely upon the car to do everyday journeys to work and to shop, etc. So thank you for letting me respond to the comments of Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you very much, Mrs. questions, Ms Milton. Now I've got 3 councillors, I think, who've indicated they wish to speak. So in order that they've indicated Councillor Holland, then Councillor Reddish, then Councillor Northcott. So Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. It's relatively unusual for us to have an application called in by councillors where it's been recommended for refusal by officers and to have councillors arguing for it to be permitted. I understand what our officer is advising us in relation to our greenbelt policy. Because the development would be, by its nature, inappropriate development in the greenbelt, we can only approve it if we identify very special circumstances. I think that's what Councillor Wilkes was inviting us to do, and the circumstances that he mentioned are that it's not open countryside, we wouldn't be losing any agricultural land, and it would not impact on the openness of the greenbelt for this to be developed because it is on an infill site. But I wonder if our officer can advise us, would us reaching that conclusion set a terrible precedent? Would it have any unintended consequences beyond this application? And secondly, because I must confess I've not read the paperwork in detail for this because it was recommended for refusal, can our officer tell us whether or not there have been any comments from neighbours on the site, and if so, were those objecting or were they supportive of the application? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Perhaps if we could ask our officer to field those questions now, and then we'll progress to Councillor Reddish.
I've actually lowered my hand, Chair, so Mrs Moulton answered my question.
Okay.
So I don't wish to speak.
That's fine, but if Mrs Moulton could address Councillor Holland's questions then.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I'll give a response to the question as to whether there's been any representations. We received 3. They're all in support of this application. In terms of whether what has been advanced amounts to very special circumstances, what has been described is not particularly unusual a situation. There are pieces of land within the greenbelt which don't particularly contribute to the openness, but they're nevertheless in the greenbelt. But there will be a building upon it, and that will affect the openness of the greenbelt. No doubt there is a spatial and a element to the openness, and the introduction of a building will adversely affect the openness of the greenbelt, albeit it is a plot of land which is surrounded by existing properties. And yes, they wouldn't result in any trees. It won't be particularly visually prominent, but all these little things weigh to a certain extent in favour of the development, but they're not of sufficient weight to overcome the harm arising from the development being inappropriate in the greenbelt by definition. So the recommendation is that there are very special circumstances, or the view of your officer is that there are very special circumstances that justify the granting of planning permission in this particular case.
Thank you. Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you, Mrs Moulton, for your response to Councillor Holland's question. We sit here on this planning committee many times and have to decide on special circumstances when we see applications in greenbelt land and whether we can actually allow them. I think looked at this case quite considerably because of that, and it's on the rural area. I tend to go over these quite with a magnification of 10 times on my magnifying glass, so to speak. I have to feel for the applicant in terms of, yes, I don't see anything inherently wrong with this, but if we start deviating from what we think should be a special circumstances test in these cases, then we risk our reputation in terms of a consistent approach to others that may come with similar applications to this committee. I don't see that the special circumstances, in my view, have been satisfied in this case, and I could not support this application going forward. So I would like to formally say that I'll object to this and recommend that we refuse it and go along with recommendations as per our officers, who have to safeguard and manage the policies in effect for the council. And I think in this case, I can't see that this satisfies that special circumstances for building in this case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. A bit of a quandary with this one, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate what's just been said and the officer's position on this. But this area is Crackley Gates. Historically, it was a lot of foot tools around that area, and it was a small industry. Ended up with a chicken farm, intense chicken farm, and that was finished and burnt down. And a lot of development has gone on since then, since that change from the mining industry, and as we move on in time. And I agree with you, it is in the green belt, but there's never going to be any footpaths there. There's a bus it runs through from Newcastle up through into Audley. So there is public transport. I'm really at a quandary, like I was saying. A lot of development has gone on to those properties there. And I think the people who live there, the people who have moved in, new people who moved in, along with the old people, are actually lifting that area up from, I say, the history of open cast and declining industry that happened years ago. The sad thing is the scrapyard, and that's a history to that, as we could go here all night talking about it. But I've got a lot of sympathy with the two councillors, and I can understand why they feel that we should go against a policy. That's all I can say really at the moment. So I'll listen to the debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Owen.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to what the members have said, and obviously Mrs. Moulton. I'm struggling to understand why we can't allow this development. It doesn't appear to be in the middle of a field. Yeah, it'll be sort of on the edge, if not within the green belt. I'll go with one point that Councillor Wilkes said, that it may be interesting for us to pay a site visit to have a look at the existing buildings there. And that's all I've got to say at this moment in time. As I say, there is buildings already there, and this development appears to be in someone's back garden or very adjacent to other properties there. I appreciate the scenario of greenbelt development, but I would be interested personally, maybe I should have done already, gone and had a look. But taking Councillor Wilkes's point again, I would be interested if this committee could pay a site visit. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor, are you formally moving that we have a site visit? Because I'm happy to take a vote on that, but it will be futile to proceed with a debate if we're going to have a site visit. I know Mr. Fleet wishes to contribute to the debate, and I'll ask him to speak next. But if we then have a motion for a site visit, I think the thing to do will be to take that so that we don't waste time debating something, then to have a site visit and have a debate after that. But I mean, it's up to you whether you wish to propose this or not.
Thank you for that, Chair, and therefore I would move that this committee pays a site visit.
Okay, before I ask for a seconder for that motion, could I ask Mr. Fleet, he's had his hand up for some time, to make his contribution to our debate?
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I say this item pivots really on the issue of greenbelt. What does that mean? Now, the site is in the greenbelt. Looking at our adopted local plan, it's got that swathe of colour over it, and that colour goes up to Scott Hay and much of the surrounding area. It does have the exemption, as my colleague Elaine Moulton says, around villages. And villages are defined in the planning policies under the core strategy. And the nearest one to that is Madeley Heath down the other end of the road. So we do have locations where infilling can be considered, but it is a greenbelt site. And what makes greenbelt different to areas like the open countryside further beyond is that it is this restrictive belt. It is this sort of control of development to try and stop the sprawl of urban centres and sort of spread out into the countryside. And I have some empathy with the arguments that yes, it's tucked around the back and it's not a blatantly obvious site, but it is a site within the Greenbelt, and the Planning Inspectorate have long held this view that although the development is not highly obvious, it is an impact on the openness of the landscape there, and it is a very sound reason for refusal in the eyes of the Inspectorate. I know Councillor Holland asked the question, are there any unintended consequences essentially if we do allow this? And in my view, I think there is a huge unintended consequence, because essentially allowing this site in the Greenbelt is essentially allowing any site in the Greenbelt. There are dozens upon dozens of these little back sites that are tucked away between the little houses here and there, whether we go to Scott Hay or anywhere else. And essentially, this would become a very clear precedent, I believe, that would say, well, we managed to sort of allow one in Crackley Gates. What's the difference in the next site and the next site? So essentially, it all becomes anything goes on any site in the Greenbelt. And that protection of the open countryside, that protection of the landscape is very much harder to achieve thereafter. And we, as officers, will find probably sites that or applications that are coming forward that we find it much more difficult to uphold and appeal, because of the Crackley Gates example will be given back to us as an example of where development has been allowed on a simple infill basis. It is unfortunately just a pure policy point. There are merits possibly in the site visit, but it is the policy that sort of drives this in this sense. And whilst the building might be aesthetically pleasing, whilst it might sit comfortably with its neighbours and not overshadow or affect the privacy, those classic issues that a site visit will look at, it's the policy where we're driving. The sustainability, we've got one component really of that, the bus transport, but jobs, other elements, shops, other things are not really in walking distance of this site. It is a relatively remote location for somebody who doesn't have access to a car, and that sort of compounds the second reason for refusal there. But it is a very key policy, the Greenbelt, and it is one that's helped protect the sort of character of the borough and help sort of lead to some of that renewal in the urban areas and stop that piecemeal sprawl over the last few decades of houses popping up all over the sort of landscape there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleet. So before we go on, we've had a proposal that we have a site visit. To proceed to a vote, we would need a seconder for that proposal. I think it is incumbent on me as chairman of the committee to point out that we also have a duty to determine things with due speed, and therefore we should only proceed to a site visit if we think that it will add information to us, which we haven't heard this evening and we cannot obtain from the photographs that we've been shown. So bearing all of that in mind, is there anyone who wishes to second Councillor Owen's proposal that we have a site visit? And I see, I'm afraid, no seconder for that proposal, and therefore I'm not going to take a vote on that. I don't know whether, I see both Councillor Holland and Councillor Williams have their blue hands up, whether those are hands which are legacy hands, so to speak, or whether they wish to speak again. Councillor Holland, do you wish to speak again?
Yes, Chair, happy to speak again. I listened carefully to the advice we received from our officers, and I thank them for their impassioned arguments. I only wish they'd been just as passionate in the past on some applications that I can think of for development in our rural areas. I'd be interested to know, because this is a resubmission of an application that was refused under delegated powers, whether there have been any changes. And on the basis that both officers and Councillor Northcott, I think, have referred to consistency in decision making as a principle that we should apply here, if we can't find any differences in this application from the one that was refused by our officers before, I think it would be appropriate for us also to refuse this one for the arguments that have been advanced, but also to promote consistency in decision making.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I move to Councillor Williams, I just ask our officers if they could answer those questions.
This is the same application as the one that was refused under delegated authority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moulton. I think that makes things clear. Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak again?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just make a point to listen to Mr. Fleet, and knowing the area very well, you can see if we get permission for this, we go against policies, and as Councillor Holland has said, we have done in the past, and Moby Tide it's come to kick us in the backside. There's land up there that's waiting for development, and I'm sure a lot of people are sitting on this land ready to develop, i.e. houses, because as I did said earlier, that there's quite big plots of land that have been industrial, that's wasted, gone by the wayside. And I'm sure I'm looking to Scotty, Enfield to Scotty, there's a little parcel of land there that if we went against policy, it would be opening the floodgates. So I'll stick with the recommendation to refuse this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other members who wish to speak before we proceed to a vote? In that case, I propose to move to a vote. Now, we're voting on the recommendation, so please remember that if you vote for the recommendation, you are voting to refuse development on this site. So, in that case, I'll ask Councillor Reddish, are you for or against the recommendation?
I'm for the recommendation, i.e. to refuse development on this site.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Refuse development, Mr. Chair, as recommended. Thank you.
Councillor Owen.
Refusal, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Refuse, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Refuse, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
The recommendations to refuse, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
Refuse, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Refuse, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Refuse, Chair.
Again, I think that's everyone. So that is, I think, a unanimous vote for the recommendation, i.e. to refuse permission for development on this site. With that, I will move to item 7 on our agenda, which is also in this part of the world, Scott Hay Farm, Leasett Road. And again, I will draw to members' attention that there is a supplementary report and an extra item in the pack that you have received. And now I'll ask our officer if there's any further information we require this evening.
No, Chair, nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I therefore open the item for comment from members. I see, again, I don't know whether it's from the last item, but Councillor Williams has his little blue hand raised. Do you wish to speak, Councillor? In that case, please do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to ask the officers, seeing this, the last planning application and this one, is the difference is purely on policy of the green belt? or is the other circumstances that you're permitting this one and not the other one? Could you ask the officer that through you?
Absolutely, Councillor. So again, if I could ask our officer if they would reply to that question.
Yeah, the difference is that this is an application for change of use of a building for conversion of an existing building. So the relevant paragraph in the MPPF states that change of use of a building can be an exception that is appropriate development in the green belt, subject to it being of permanent and substantial construction. So yeah, that's the difference, that this is for a conversion, whereas the other one is for a new building.
That's it.
Is that an answer to your question, Councillor?
Reasonable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Be any further comments on this item from members? In that case, again, I propose to move to a vote on the recommendation. So I'll ask Councillor Reddish whether she's for or against the recommendation. Councillor Reddish.
For the recommendation to permit.
Councillor Williams. You're muted, Councillor.
Yeah, permit, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland. I can't hear you, Councillor.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
I think that's everyone, and I think then that recommendation has been passed unanimously. We can progress now to item 8, where we have a local member who wishes to speak, Councillor Gary White. Before I ask the councillor to address us, I'll just ask our officer if there's any further information that we should all know before that our debate begins.
No, there's nothing further to make you aware of, but we also have a representation of a public speaker wishing to speak in opposition to the application, Mr. Hardy. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moulton. I think I'm correct in saying that the speaking protocol is that the ward councillor speaks first, and then our public speaker speaks after the ward councillor. Again, just to outline the procedure here, both our speakers will have 5 minutes to address the committee, which is the sum total of their contribution to the debate this evening. They will be timed by our clerk, who will give them a warning, a verbal warning after 4 of those 5 minutes have elapsed, so that they don't miss out any crucial points. So on those terms, I invite first Councillor Gary White to address the committee. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Councillor Simon White and myself called this before you this evening because in the original application, we were unhappy with the longevity of the time that was being requested for the completion of the track, which was originally autumn of 2022. Now, I'm pleased to say that in the officer recommendation report, that has been altered to November 2021 of this year, which we are happy with and believe that that is acceptable. However, there are a number of issues still with this site that we wanted to just bring to your attention to make sure and basically give you a bit of history on it. So this planning committee did approve this track back in 2018. The applicants did not complete the works. They started it, they did not complete, and hence the planning application ran out, and is why it is back in front of you now. It's got to be said that during this time, the site, in our opinion, is an absolute mess and has continued to be exacerbated by the applicant's behaviours. there is more and more machinery moving onto the site, which is creating both issues with the physical appearance and also issues with the neighbouring roads and issues for the neighbours themselves. I think it also draws your attention that the Environment Agency, in one of their representation to this, have made a statement that because of the issues that they have identified, which has gone against the EA requirements, they are not allowing any soil, infrastructure or materials to be imported onto this site. And so therefore it does raise the question, unless the applicant already has the necessary materials to complete this, how is he going to do so? Because the EA will not allow any importation whatsoever, is my understanding. I was also referring to the objection from the resident, who I now see is going to make overtures to yourself. The only point I would raise with this is that the resident did supply photographs of the current site itself. They, for one reason or another, haven't been put on the public portal. And I asked Miss Moulton if they could be made available for you tonight, and she said that they could. So I would ask that you ask to see these photographs, because they would give you a good insight as to what the current site is and what the locality is experiencing. So it's a bit of a dilemma, really, because this track is needed in order to make the improvements, and therefore now that it's a November 21 timeline, that satisfies the original reason why we brought it before you. But at the same time, you've got to question, will this applicant ever complete these works? And that's the end of my submission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor White. I now invite Mr. Hardy to address the committee on the same terms. So begin when you feel ready, Mr. Hardy.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to make this representation. Just following up on Councillor White's comment, really, obviously from a local resident perspective, the following points that I've made already in the objection may be deemed to be not material to determination of the planning application, but they are, however, important consequential impacts to planning being granted. Access via Waybutt Lane, which is the roadway servicing this piece of land, has been adversely affected by the applicant's activities. We've seen an environmental health impact due to a growing problem with vermin in recent months off the back of the activities. And we also have a visual impact in terms of the Greenbelt countryside. And, you know, certainly since the original application was granted in 2018, I've followed up numerous requests for support by local authorities and government agencies to understand how this area could be better controlled and enforced in terms of its activities, because, you know, what we have seen in terms of the history of this site is that enforcement and control has been sadly lacking. If I refer to the previous planning application that was granted in 2018, there was an allowance for inert waste to be brought to site. I think a quota of 6,000 tonnes was allowed in a 24-month period. What the applicant has actually admitted, you know, in terms of this latest application, is that he's brought 10,000 tonnes plus to site. So that obviously raises a point about a restriction that's not adhered to, and, you know, also raises questions in terms of control. There's also an allowance for HGVs per day to access the site. I think 16 HGVs per day. But again, no evidence of proof of adherence, because it's another restriction that, you know, from the outside, you know, looking in, doesn't look as if it can be controlled. And where's the data-led evidence to suggest that this is feasible? The condition of the lane is already very poor. There have been multiple pothole repairs conducted via Cheshire East as the neighbouring authority that have been actioned through the original application. So much so that Cheshire East have actually since moved the boundary lane past the entrance to this land, because they don't want to be involved in terms of road repairs moving forward. And also in terms of the time allowed originally, 24 months, expired November 2020, but we've had confirmed examples of activity since, particularly during the winter months, which brings associated mud and slurry on the lane, makes it impassable for pedestrians and cyclists. personal examples of healthcare professionals and courier drivers refusing to pass to visit our property. Let's not forget that this access road is also supporting a local business in terms of Border Fisheries, which sits in the Cheshire East borderline. And also linked to this, there was a temporary stop notice that's been enforced by Newcastle Planning in April of 21, this month, which again demonstrates a lack of adherence to rules and regulations by the applicant. So in terms of the current application, what stood out for me in terms of the report is that there's a recommendation for a further 6,000 tonnes of inert waste to be brought to site in only 6 months versus a similar volume that was allowed in the previous 24 months, which suggests we're going to get more HGV traffic in a shorter period of time. And there's also a contradiction versus the 16 HGVs per day, because that potentially means a much greater volume than 6,000 tonnes. Not to mention that the volume and type of waste is not being tracked. So where is the commitment from the council to monitor and ensure adherence? In terms of the recommendation for an additional 6 months, obviously this has been reduced from the original requirement or the request for 18 months. But again, the past history suggests this will not be adhered to post November 21. And again, where is the commitment from the council to monitor and ensure adherence?
1 minute.
There's also a lack of recommendation in terms of restriction on the applicant to restore the area post-works, in terms of the condition of the lane, in terms of surrounding hedges, trees and road signs which have been damaged. And also in the applicant's information, he suggests partial completion of the current track, which actually is in line with where bales of waste currently stored on the land, which are subject to separate Environment Agency enforcement. So it does beg the question in terms of how much of this track has actually been built. So in summary, the countryside has been blighted by this applicant's previous activities. Waybutt Lane has significantly deteriorated its condition since original planning. The applicant has a history of not abiding to rules and regulations. Where is the commitment from the council to support this application to monitor, to ensure adherence, and to return the site to the original condition? And obviously from a member of the public just observing this, where is the joined up approach from public authorities in examples like this? The Environment Agency have rejected further waste being brought to site, but planning consider this to be non-material to the planning determination. So who will have the final say and ultimate control of the adherence to the outcome? Because the past record even suggests that the Environment Agency struggle to enforce control on this site. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hardy. Before I open this item for debate, I'll ask our officer if they wish to comment on what they've heard so far.
Yes, I think members are fully aware of the site and the history and the history of enforcement action that has been taken against unauthorised development on the site. There's clearly a commitment of the local authority to address any breaches of planning control. The stop notice being a recent example of proactive action against a breach of planning control. So there certainly is such a commitment. There are matters that are beyond the scope of the local planning authority, but members are aware that the Environment Agency are also investigating and have taken action against activity within the site. So that there is enforcement action, and there has been ongoing monitoring of the site and compliance with the terms of planning permission. And as a subsequent to any decision on this application, monitoring will continue. We are fully aware of the issues surrounding the site, and we are prepared to address those. Reference was made to the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency, in commenting upon this planning application and the proposed variation of the condition, have raised no objections. They have, however, I advised the authority that there is no permit to import any further material onto the site. That is not material to the determination of the application. There are no objections from the Environment Agency or recognition that that's not a material consideration. That's matter that is enforced through other legislation. So it is not something that could influence the decision, but clearly the Environment Agency will be doing their bit to ensure that any breaches of their legislation is addressed, as they have done with other activity on the site. There's the activity involved with the finishing off of the track. The vehicular movements involved with that will no doubt have some impact on the highway, but the lack of completion of the track in itself creates problems, because vehicles in association with the agricultural activities on the site do track mud and debris onto the highway, and obviously a completed track will make the likelihood of that happening less. So there are benefits in terms of the highway should the track be completed. That there has been significant works done in terms of the construction of the track, but there is still a stretch to be completed, which is away from Weybrook Lane. I think well, the only other comment I would wish to make is in respect of the reference to vermin. It is unclear how the proposal to extend the time limit set out within the condition, which is the subject of the application, has any bearing upon vermin in the area. And there's no doubt that vermin is an issue in rural areas, but it does not have any bearing upon the determination of this particular application. I don't think there's much more I can add at this stage, so thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. Moulton. Now, I'm looking at my screen. I've got 3 members who wish to contribute to our debate. The order in which they've indicated is Councillor Williams, then Councillor Holland, then Councillor Northcott. So as long as those hands are again for this item, I invite Councillor Williams to make his contribution.
Thank you, Chair. We give permission for this track to ease the situation. And it sounds like we get permission, and it's made the situation worse. You could build a motorway in the time that it's taking this applicant to complete the work. So he's clearly not going to carry on. He's putting for another plan application. Clearly, he hasn't. There's no soul in the sense of that he wants to put a road in to ease the situation, and it's just a mess. When the Environmental Agency. Again, we've had enough of them with the stink. It's absolutely appalling what's going on. They're destroying the area. He mentions the green belt. I'm having a bit of a rant here. And he's actually destroying, this applicant is destroying the green belt and the open countryside as we know it. So I can't really add anything other than if we say we can't carry on with the road, we're stuck with it. So we're in a cleft stick here, Mr. Chairman, and I can't see any other way out of pushing him to get this road completed to take the wagon. So he apparently, according to the residents, he's still tipping on there. Well, why not do the road first and then? But quite clearly, he's tipping on there as he just stops production of putting the road in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holland, I see your hand's gone down. Do you wish to contribute or not?
I would like to speak, Chair.
You would like to speak? Yeah, well, please do so.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, Councillor White invited us to ask to see the photographs. I would like to see the photographs because I can imagine what they look like, but I think we should still have the benefit of reviewing them at this time. Secondly, there was a comment from Mr. Hardy suggesting that we've annexed part of Cheshire. I'm surprised to learn that's the case. I don't know whether it's relevant to the planning application, but do our officers have any information about the level to which we are in communication with Cheshire East Council about the maintenance on Weybrook Lane, and if they've got anything to add on that? I think lastly, I would say this is an application for variation of conditions. It's not in front of us an enforcement report, but it does touch on enforcement issues. And I know the site has a very long planning history. The application in front of us is for variation of conditions 5 and 6. And I think what I want to say is that when that limit of the amount of inert waste that's supposed to be imported onto the site is reached, or when the time limit in November is reached, what is this authority going to do to enforce that? Because we're anticipating action on part of the applicant or the landowner. I appreciate we're not at that point in time yet, but I know that when we do reach that time, our officers are going to say, well, is enforcement proportionate at this time? Surely some of this enforcement is something that the Environment Agency ought to be doing. And do we have the resources to properly conduct enforcement activity? Those are the sorts of questions that our officers are going to ask when that rolls around. So there is no automatic reason why we will enforce, but I think this committee should be sending a very strong message to our officers that amplifies the voice of those residents locally and those local representatives who we've heard from tonight, that the behaviour of the applicant has for a very, very long time been unacceptable. And when we are voting tonight, I would like it to be the case that the wording of whatever we send is adequately robust such that we can take enforcement action and we are not unthinkingly hobbling ourselves in the future. But I'm aware of the long, sad history of the site in question. Commenting specifically on the two things that we're looking to vary today, are we going to make sure that we enforce and stick to what we agree in terms of variations? Because I'm certain that's probably where we're headed. I know Councillor White has said that if he was voting tonight, he would be supporting the application on the basis that the time limit there has been reined in somewhat. But like others, I'm very disappointed that we are where we are.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Northcott. And then after that, we'll move to the photographs. Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to also ask for the photographs as well before we go any further on this, before making any further comment. Thank you,
Okay,
Chair.
you know, if you prefer that way around, Councillor, I'll ask our officer if we can now see the photographs.
Yes, just bear with me, I can show the photographs. I would also like to respond to the issue of enforcement should the condition, if varied as a result of this application, not be complied with. I have a comment to make on that, but I can show you the photographs of Mr. Hardy if you bear with me a moment. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So that's the first photograph showing activity on the site, which I believe is where the track is being constructed. That is not related to the application, but it is the baled waste, which is the waste activity that the Environment Agency is involved with the enforcement of. Further examples of the baled waste. That is a vehicle on Waybutt Lane, I assume accessing the site of the track, or the point where the track meets Waybutt Lane. And that's a longer distance view of some of the baled waste that's on the site. As I say, that's not relevant to the determination of this application. It's a matter that the Environment Agency are addressing. Yes, in terms of enforcement, there was a breach of the condition that the application seeks to vary. The time period within which the condition allowed the importation of materials ended sometime towards the end of last year. There hasn't been a continuous breach of that condition since that time period lapsed, but activity did start relatively recently, and that resulted in the serving of the stop notice. So officers have identified a breach of planning control, that the particular condition, and have taken action to address that through the serving of the temporary stop notice. And should the condition that, assuming that planning permission is granted tonight and the condition is varied, should that condition be breached, then unless there's a change in circumstances, it is likely that enforcement action would take. And I think the stop notice is an indication of the seriousness that your officers take with regard to the breach of that particular condition. And there was one more thing that I just remembered about the arrangement with Cheshire East. I can't say that I'm aware of any formal changes to the administrative areas. Certainly there isn't any formal changes. I suspect there may be some arrangement between Cheshire East as the relevant planning authority within their administrative area and Staffordshire County Council as the highway authority covering the Borough of Newcastle. So there may be some arrangements as to where they carry out repairs and where the Cheshire East carry out repairs. So there may be some agreement that has taken place, but it's not a matter that we are aware of, and that I can only suppose that that's what has happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moulton. I'll return now to Councillor Northcott, who I think wished to comment after he'd seen the photographs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mrs. Moulton, for providing those. Well, we're here again, aren't we, on this site? On one hand, I want to be adopting a get tough approach. We can obviously see from those photographs that the bales of the waste is deteriorating, so one can only presume that that's flying around the countryside when it escapes from there, as it's not secure anymore, and it's adding more problems to this area. Secondly, this applicant hasn't got a good history of working well with this council in terms of what it adheres to and what he doesn't adhere to. And time again, we know that we're up here for enforcement notices and how we are acting as a council. And the perception is, though, from the local community, is that this council does nothing in terms of its obligations to make sure these things are enforced. The applicant has had a massive amount of time to get this track finished. We're 3 years down the line nearly on this, and housing estates have been built in that time. Do we accept that this application in the fullness of disclosure is expected to work with us and is to be believed that it's going to be adhering to the conditions that we may apply to any application that we change? That I'll leave for members to decide, but it doesn't look good, does it? That, on one hand we're seeking to enforce, we're seeking to work with partner agencies that have been led a fair old merry dance on this one in terms of not being able to progress very far. So I'm in two minds. Yes, I can see the merits of granting extra time and following the advice of officers, but also I'd like it fairly tight. That's the expectation that we have, and that we're going to enforce should it not be adhered to. I think this time, in fairness to the letter of the condition that's in front of us. I see that this isn't going to be any scope to manoeuvre around, and it's going to be fairly static. And this is, to be quite frank, trying the patience, I think, of this committee and authority in acting this way. So I would go with the officers' recommendations on this case, but with a caveat of being really strict in terms of what we expect, when we expect it by, and if it's not going to be done by any stretch of the imagination, that we come down on this as hard as we possibly can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Reddish.
I mean, I'd probably echo a lot that's already been said. I think our hands are a bit tied, because if we don't agree to this variation, the mess that's there will continue to be there. So I think I'm probably minded to go along with officer recommendation. However, like all my colleagues, I want to know what happens on the 1st of November when the applicant still hasn't done the work that we want. We clearly can't keep on extending this variation and extending it. So I think as part of this, I would be wanting to say to the applicant, if he's listening, that we really do mean the 1st of November. and there's no more variations. And if we're going for enforcement, I'd quite just like to get the reassurance from the officers that we are definitely going to do it this time, and that come the 2nd of November, if this trackway hasn't progressed, that enforcement action will start really on the 2nd of November.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak again?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just some clarity, that if we agree to the recommendation, does that mean that he's got to complete the track without bringing any more materials onto the main site? He can only bring materials on to complete the track and not bring any materials onto the main site. Am I correct in that, assuming that, Mr. Chairman?
I'll just ask our officer whether that assumption is correct. Mrs. Moulton.
The permission allows the importation, and the variation of the condition that is being applied for allows the importation onto the site for the construction of the track. If material is brought onto the site for any other purpose, that potentially is a separate matter and could constitute a breach of planning control. But certainly the permission only allows importation of the materials to complete the track. And I just wanted to make the point that the variation of the condition that is being sought is to extend the period within which material can be imported and to enable, which will enable the track to be completed. As of the 1st of November, or after the 1st of November, there will be no more material imported, but there will be no breach of planning control if the track at that point wasn't completed. That in itself is not a breach. The breach would be after that date if more material was brought onto the site. That's the only action that could be taken, is in breach of that condition. And we have already taken action against the breach of the condition as it currently exists, and we would be prepared to take action if a breach of the condition occurred in its varied form if planning permission is granted tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any further contributions from members? I feel myself again as if we are very much in an unfortunate position here, because manifestly I think all of us would wish to see these works completed, but we also feel that the amount of time that this has dragged on for is I mean, we have to bear in mind the problems with, of course, the COVID problem that we've got, but nonetheless that this has dragged on for a very long time. I think we really ought to make it clear, and I don't know whether this can be phrased in the conditions or attached in a note, that really the committee does not feel that any further extension beyond the extension that's proposed here would be appropriate. As regards the construction of the site, I thank our officer for making it absolutely clear what this item is about this evening. That I think is at the end of the day something that the applicant needs to think carefully about. But it does seem to me that we have come to the end of the road, even with the conditions we find ourselves in now, for extensions to this permission. I don't know whether I say that because I think I am, and I'm sure members will correct me if I'm not, but I am echoing the views of the committee when saying that, and that we would really, I think, find it very, very difficult indeed to revisit this at the end of this period of time and see a reason for a further extension. I cannot see why we would be minded to do so. So I think that it's important to think that this is the last of these extensions in that regard, albeit I don't think, and again our officer will correct me if I'm wrong, that we can actually write that into our resolution this evening. I'm correct in thinking that, aren't I?
The only way is to write to the applicant or put an advisory note on the planning permission to that effect. There's certainly nothing that you could introduce by way of conditions that would convey that message.
I look to the committee. Does the committee feel that the drafting of such a note after our proceedings this evening would be the correct approach?
Yes, I certainly do.
I'd support that, Chair.
I'm looking for voices against that. If anyone feels that that would be the wrong thing to do, if they would speak now, please. Otherwise, I think what we will do, we will vote on this with the understanding that such a note will be drafted and sent. Are members content with that?
Yes.
In that case, what I propose to do now is take a vote on the recommendation in front of us. So, again, we're voting for or against the recommendation we see in front of us. Councillor Reddish.
For the recommendation to permit.
Councillor Williams.
For the recommendations, Chair.
Councillor Owen.
For, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
The recommendation as printed, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
For the recommendations, Chair.
Councillor Northcott.
For the recommendations as printed, Chair.
Councillor Burgess.
For the recommendations as printed.
Councillor Maxfield.
For the recommendations as printed, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
For the recommendations as printed, Chair.
Right, so that recommendation is clearly carried, and given the wishes of the committee, I will also ask our officers to draft an advisory note in the terms that we've discussed and forward that to the applicant. On that note, we can pass to item 9 of our agenda, an application for other development at the Old Hall, Madeley. I draw members' attention to the fact there are 2 supplementary reports in your pack on this matter, and I'll just ask our officer if there's any further information that we should be cognizant of at the moment.
No, Chair, nothing further to be aware of, thank you.
And I now open the item for comment from members. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the second supplementary, the Conservation Officer's recommendation accords with our planning officers. I'm sorry to note that the Conservation Advisory Working Party had an alternative view, and I hate voting against the recommendations of CORP. But on this occasion, I'm inclined to agree with the Conservation Officer and support the recommendation as printed. In the interests of consistency in decision making, would it be appropriate for us to place a condition requiring this work to be carried out before the 1st of November, Chair?
I'll ask our officer whether that is an appropriate thing to do or not.
Fortunately, Chair, no, I don't think in this one. It's the first application. I think we'll give them the benefit of the doubt if the committee agree.
Now that seems to me a very wise answer, if I may say so. Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure I can follow the humour of Councillor Holland on that one, but I'll take that as an enlightenment to the evening. I've had a good look at this application. I can't see there's any major issues with it. It's just unfortunate the recommendations from CORP conflict with the view of officers. It's not as if the repair and renovation works is going to deviate from the inherent characteristics of this building. I don't see any grounds that we can actually use to not support this. So I will be supporting this application in terms of the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any further members who wish to comment on this item? In that case, I propose to move to a vote. We'll be voting on the recommendation as printed. Councillor Reddish.
Permit as recommended.
Councillor Williams.
Permit, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Owen.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Holland.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Jill Williams.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Northcott. I can't hear you, Councillor.
Permit, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burgess.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Maxfield.
Permit, Chair.
Councillor Cooper.
Permit, Chair.
I think that is everyone, and that is unanimous in favour of the recommendation. That means we can progress to item 11 of our agenda, which, as you can see, oh no, I beg your pardon, I'm ahead of myself. Item 10 of our agenda on bogs cottages, and I ask our officer if we've got any further comments we need to hear about tonight.
We have received a letter from the Planning Inspectorate. The indication is that they are intending to carry out the hearing on the 14th of June as scheduled, but they are still asking the question of the local planning authority and the appellant as to whether there are any objections to that. Certainly the officers on behalf of the local planning authority are intending to write to the Planning Inspectorate to advise that in our opinion there are no objections to holding the hearing on the 14th of June, and I assume that that's the message that the planning committee would wish us to convey to the Planning Inspectorate. But yeah, we'll have to wait to see how the Planning Inspectorate would react if the appellant raises any objections. The date by which that they have asked us to comment is, I think, something like the 10th of May. It is quite a long run into that, so it could be a while before we have the final view of the inspectorate on that. But we should have it in time to report in our next update, which is in June, which will probably be after the hearing, all being well.
That's so. Any comments from members? Mrs. Moulton raises, I think, an important point here about the timetable. Now, let us hope that the timetable that we're informed about here is the timetable that goes ahead. If that is the case, as Mrs. Moulton points out, we will be up to perhaps past the point of the hearing. Would it therefore be, or would members think it appropriate that we've been taking this item at every other meeting of the committee, that given what may happen, hopefully will not happen, as terms the date of this actual hearing, would members feel that it would be appropriate to have an update at our next planning committee meeting so that we were ahead of the game, so to speak? I'd look for comment from members on that as a suggestion that we have this as an item on our next agenda.
That sounds sensible, Chair.
Yes, that sounds reasonable.
So unless I hear to the contrary, what I'll do is I'll now ask our officers if we could have an update at on our next agenda for our next meeting on this particular item. Yes,
we'll provide an update then.
That's very good. That's very good. So let's leave it at that. Are members content that we receive this report? I don't propose to take a vote on this. It's not an issue for a vote in that respect. Are we content that we receive the report?
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair.
In that case, we'll move to Doddlespool, item 11 on our agenda. Now, this again is not an item for debate as such, but a local councillor, Councillor White, wished to speak to this item, and given that it is in that ward, I think it's appropriate that the councillor is allowed to voice his opinion. So if Councillor White wishes to speak to this item, now will be the time to do so.
Thank you, Chair. Members will have seen, even with the debate that we had previously on the track, the number of issues that are continuing to cause major disturbance for the community. They've also seen the photographs which the Environment Agency are still not yet taken action on to have those bales removed. Those bales are breaking up. They are spreading across the countryside. The cattle, we are told, are eating some of it. There is also now the actual landowner has brought onto the site a number of heavy earth moving items of equipment. There are large mounds, and when I say mounds, I'm talking 20 to 30 foot of soil being moved around the site itself. Us as the two ward councillors have in the last 3 months received substantial representations from the community, both from neighbours, from the general community itself, and from the parish council. The work that is going on this site is causing a lot of issues for everybody that lives both around it and travels through it. And the one thing that we do know through the experience which Councillor Williams referred to earlier is that the EA, unfortunately, are very slow and reticent to take action. We've seen this with Wally's Quarry up until very recently, where they've had no choice. So we wanted to make you aware of the situation. We want you to continue to view this on a bi-monthly basis. And also, if appropriate, would it be suitable for you as a planning committee to write to the EA, expressing your concerns and asking for the appropriate action to be expedited? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I look for further comments from members on the report and this particular issue. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what the councillor just said. And if we go back, we were waiting for a report from government or the higher authorities, i.e. in the criminal activity in people tipping this kind of waste. And we had it in back of Bateswood and 1 or 2 sites. That was cleared up by the public purse, i.e. Staffs County Council. But I was led to believe that a report was going to come. It was going to go up to the, I suppose, government, I suppose, or looks into this kind of tipping. And it was criminal activity, because nobody knew where this waste come from. And it sounds ridiculous. This is a modern world where where everything is chitted and all the rest of it. Years ago, everything had to be over a weighbridge and set out, but seemed to people, for whatever reason, hiding this activity and where this waste is coming from. So I agree with Councillor White, but also, are we ever going to get this report? Can other members of this committee remember the time when we were told that we were going to have or the council was told that we were going to have a report, or this problem was going to go to the highest authority in the country? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holland, then Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Chair. Reflecting on what Councillor White said, I can see no harm in either this committee or the Chair writing to the Environment Agency, because there is an interface between the enforcement activity that this authority takes and the enforcement activity that should be taken by the Environment Agency. So I can't see that being a harmful thing, and I would support that. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our officers. I do appreciate the work that is going into enforcement, and I do understand that any violations of the temporary stop notice will be further considered for enforcement. I know that they act reasonably. I know that we act reasonably as a committee, but while we're doing that, I do believe that somebody out there is getting away with wickedness, and I only wish to communicate the frustration that I know everyone else feels as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to echo Councillor Holland's views on this, and the views of Councillor White, especially in terms of his representation of local community. We need to send out the message that we're not prepared to just put up with this, and for it not to comment or not to put any report into the Environment Agency, I think just makes it easier for them really to circumnavigate the process that they're going to have to go down to get rid of the waste that's residing on that land and is exposed to all the animals, beasts that approach it, and also the wind blowing it into neighbouring properties, fields and land, etc. It's not acceptable. It never has been acceptable as far as I'm concerned. And as an authority, I think we must be continuing to put the pressure on the Environmental Agency that these are the sort of cases we expect action on them. When we ask for their involvement, we don't do it lightly. And in this case, it certainly isn't light. This has been an ongoing saga. And to stand by and not do anything isn't an option. I think we should keep the pressure up, right to the EA, as has been suggested. And this is not to be acceptable by this committee, this authority, and the members that represent the community and the community themselves, that this isn't on, and we act accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see Mr. Fleet wishes to contribute to the debate, so I'll ask him to make his contribution now.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, clearly the engagement with our partner organisations in terms of enforcement action is a key one in terms of closing off opportunities for sort of they said, and ducking and weaving between the enforcement protocols that we have between us. We do have to coordinate our efforts with the Environment Agency and county in terms of highway works, but we have been talking to them over the past year despite COVID, and we think we've got a reasonably strong position with them. As I say, they're commenting on the planning application. I've just been making a note myself to get in touch with the key team leader at the Environment Agency tomorrow. But yes, the idea of writing to them is one that certainly we can undertake. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fleet. Given what Mr. Fleet has just said, could I propose that we have a letter drafted to the Environment Agency outlining our concern at the tardiness of all of this and the enforcement which should attend to it, and that I would suggest that that letter should be signed perhaps by myself as chairman of this committee and Councillor Northcott as the portfolio holder for planning. Would members feel that that was an appropriate form of action?
Yes, Chair.
Again, I look for dissenting voices. If I don't hear dissenting voices, I will ask our officers to draft such a letter, and then I will sign it, and Councillor Northcott will countersign it, or vice versa, depending on how protocol goes. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yes, I agree with you, Chair. But still, like I said earlier on, the cause of this problem, that's what we need. You know, it's beyond us. We're actually talking about Dudspool, and we need to back the local councillors and what they're trying to do, and of course the residents. But it's the cause of this problem in the first place. That's beyond us, I know. But where do we stand in that? We're a small fry, I suppose, in the big pool. Thank you.
Well, I think, Councillor, at the end of the day, I mean, obviously, it will be useful for the Environment Agency, which is the large national body, to put its weight fully behind enforcement of this issue. And I would hope that a letter sent to them, after all, they must be now quite familiar with Newcastle-under-Lyme, one would hope, would draw their attention to this additional problem that the borough has, and hopefully they would take some action to make sure that this problem is resolved in a satisfactory way. Are members content that we proceed in that fashion? And equally, I'm assuming that members would wish us to revisit this with a report, not at our next meeting, but at the one after that, to go on the bi-meeting cycle. Would I be correct in saying that as well?
Yes.
I look round and I see nodding heads, so I'll ask our officers to append a report, not for our next meeting, but for the one after that.
Yes, Chair.
That brings us to item 12 of our agenda, which is an update on the breach of planning obligations as regards the ex-railway station at Silverdale. You see the report in front of you. I don't know if our officers wish to add anything to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It is to update. It is a complicated matter, and we have tried to explore all opportunities. We're still pursuing the developers, Back Construction, who at the heart of it are the lead party with the Section 106 payments on that site. But we are also acutely aware that there are a number of families out of the 23 on the site who are keen to sort of move now. The challenge remains as before, that if they sort of pay their share, effectively that's a burden that all other 23 or 22 are going to have to share as well. It is a costly sum, and we're sort of drafting a letter at the moment which will go to all residents. I need to share that with legal just to check and alert people. We understand that pretty much most people on the site through hearsay know already anyway, so we're not sort of entering into unknown lands with them. But the moment we sort of initiate a proposal that says we can accept partial payment from residents, it is essentially sort of letting back construction off the hook to one extent. There is an element of this that is a borough council obligation for the open space, but our partners in the county council for education and highways as well need to be sort of on board with that arrangement. But unless we sort of push this to sort of provide that opportunity for residents to pay their way out, then essentially the 106 remains unpaid. It remains a sort of mark on the land searches for future buyers to make a judgment whether they wish to enter into this enforcement issue. I'd be surprised if there are many people willing to sort of step into it, because otherwise it leaves the current incumbents in those properties trapped, and that in itself is a very invidious situation for people to find themselves in. So it is trying to find that way forward, but the sums aren't small. These are major developments, and the infrastructure that supports communities is a substantial one. And for the authority, for this authority to step back and say, well, it's difficult, we would also have to have the county step back and accept that those education provisions and the highway bits as well are costs that can be stepped away from. And again, it's a message we don't want to be sending out to other developers that we will try for a few times. We've had some legal advice, we're seeking extra, we're getting resources into that side to bolster, but we are still pursuing this one. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleet. As Mr. Fleet says, a very awkward and complex situation. I thank him for the update, which I think sets the issues out clearly. I look to see if members wish to contribute to discussion here, or whether we are happy to receive the report. I'm taking it that silence means we are content to receive the report. And again, I'd like to thank the work our officers have done on this very awkward item. That brings us to item 13 of our agenda, which is an update on the 5-year housing land supply. And again, the dates on this are correct. The calculations obviously take time to work through and such like. So the figure that says 2020 really does mean 2020 on this document. Again, I don't know whether our officers wish to speak to this or whether members wish to comment upon it.
Nothing really to say. The numbers are what they are in the plan, that we do have a 5-year land supply, and it is the correct dates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fleet. Any comments from members? In that case, I simply draw members' attention to the fact, and please do draw it to colleagues beyond the committee's attention as well. It's a very important document. And again, thank our officers for compiling it and presenting it in I think, a readily comprehensible form. And I'm very grateful for that work. That brings us to our final item this evening, which is to consider any business which is defined as urgent within the relevant section of the relevant Act. I know of none. I look with trepidation towards our officers in case there is some that's escaped my attention.
There are no items of urgent business, thank you.
In that case, that brings our meeting to a close this evening. Thank you all for your attendance this evening. If you are not at home, do have a safe journey home. And if you are at home, do enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.